Welcome back. In this video we're going to start making the coils and the base for our coil form assignment. To get started you're going to need a couple supplies. Number one, you're going to need one of the square bats or wear boards to put your work on as you get started. You're also going to need a banding wheel. These are located on the side of the room. This is what you can put your work on and spin as you start doing the coils. You'll also need some slip mixed up in a container, your fettling knife, perhaps a needle tool, and maybe a modeling tool or two. Okay, you should also have a plastic bag so that you can wrap up your work when you're finished. All right, now getting started, you're gonna need a large chunk of already wedged out clay. Okay, so we'll get back to that in a minute. I've taken this chunk off of my wedged up clay and I've kind of patted it into an orange size shape. Then you're going to start making the bottom base for your work. And what you're going to do is, if you just take this and pat it into the working surface, and then this is another way for making a slab. If you kind of take this chunk and throw it on a diagonal, and I'll do it this way so you can actually see the diagonal. You throw it this way and then flip it over and throw it against the table. It will slowly work itself out into a slab. Notice that I'm turning it and flipping it over each time as I throw it so that the particles of the clay get stretched at a different rate and a different angle each time so that I don't end up with too many cracks in it once I'm done. Once you've got your slab pulled out so that it's approximately 1/2 inch, take your fettling knife and compress the edges just like we did on our slab box, because this is a slab and we don't want it to break. Notice that I'm making this slab right on the canvas table rather than making it on one of the canvas work boards, just because it's a small one. Now, if you already have a shape cut out that you want for the base circular piece, or if you're making an oval or some other kind of shape, you can trace around that. If not, and you know you're just going to be starting with a simple circle, and you can kind of free hand it or eyeball it or whatever you want to call it. This clay is still soft, so it's a little malleable and we can change it around. Okay, so I've got that circle that I'm going to start with. I'm going to place my leftover clay to the side for later. And if it's a little bit wonky or not quite circular, you can roll it on the table if you've got a little burr. If it's a circle, if it's an oval or some other funky shape, obviously that won't work. But you can take a circle and kind of roll it and get it nice and even. Then place the base of your work onto your wear board in the center. Then take the base and place that on top of your banding wheel. So as you're working with it, you can spin it and attach the coils more easily. All right, now the banding wheels, the bottom falls off of them. So as you pick it up, try to use 2 hands rather than just grabbing the top, because those fall and hit the floor and it's pretty noisy. All right, then as you get started, I like to start with a larger chunk of clay. And as I start working these coils, I'm moving the clay from the center and keeping my hands together and working my hands outward towards the edge. Okay, you want to get it nice and even, and what I do is I start with this big chunk of clay so that when it gets to be a little bit unmanageable, I break it in half. Then I start with my next chunk of clay. Now you'll notice that this table is absorbing the moisture quite a bit. If you get to a point where the clay starts to crack and get too dry, or if the clay starting out is already dry because it's been recycled too many times in the ceramics room, you can just get a wet sponge, get the table damp, and then roll that too dry clay into the wet canvas, and it will reabsorb some of that moisture. Okay, so if you are having clay that's cracking a bunch, just add some more moisture into it by putting the moisture right onto the table. You don't want to saturate the table so much that the clay starts sticking to it, but you want to get it wet enough that it doesn't start cracking. Now, if you look at this coil, it's a little bit flat on that one end, and you'll hear it kind of flapping back and forth as you start rolling. If that happens, you can just take that tall edge, Squish it down a little bit with your fingers and then roll that until it's round. Okay? One thing you want to be aware of though as you do that, don't trap any air pockets in the clay as you crunch it over. If you trap air pockets into that clay, it gets an air bubble in there and then it'll explode later. So don't do that. Okay? Now I'm going to speed this up a little bit. And what I do is each time I feel like it gets a little bit too long and unmanageable, I break it in half and set it aside. And you can't see them, but they're all kind of sitting right here outside the camera. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to work these pieces of clay until I get them to be approximately 1/4 of an inch in size. And I want them to be nice and even. Sorry, I'm just moving all the stuff out of the way so I can actually get it bigger. So that I've got nice, even sizes of coils. Now, excuse the bell. Once I'm done with that one, I've got this other one here sitting already prepared. And I would take this and then roll it out to be the same size. And what happens is if you half your clay and you kind of keep working in this way, you can get a bunch of coils that are nice and long, but they're all even and they're all pretty much the same size. And then you can work with them pretty easily. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside. Now, you keep working. I would recommend starting with about 3 or 4 coils that are nice and long that you can work with throughout the period. Then at the end of the period, if you have any coils left, you can, put them back in the pug bucket. Do not save them because they'll get too dried out. Okay? That's kind of how you want to start rolling your coils and get started on your project. Okay? Now we're going to come back in the next video and we'll start attaching your coils onto your base.